Well, welcome. And we're going to do a demo first looks of RX5. And if you haven't seen it yet, then you'll get a good chance here. I do have a very short 12-minute video that's already out about RX5. And it's a real quick and dirty overview. And today's going to be a little more in depth. I'll show some things that I didn't go over in that demo. And then I'll take questions and we'll go over whatever you want. Now, first thing, if you already own RX4 and you bought it 2 months ago, then you may or may not want to upgrade. You may choose to wait 6 weeks or 2 years or whatever you want. This is not a mandatory update. It saved me boatloads of time, but I work with a lot of audio. If you have the perfect room, you don't need RX4 other than maybe a little denoising. It's a great toolkit. And while we're going to look at some features here, it's not about one feature. It's about having a toolkit so when something goes wrong, you can solve it. If there's a dog that barks, you can deal with it. I have a gentleman that has this great booth who has an air conditioner that he never heard, and he has all his books going to a major publisher. And at certain times of the year when the AC kicks in, even with this really good booth, there's a very faint air conditioner hum that's going on in the background. And so he called me and we set it up in RX5 and just took it out. I mean, it was a piece of cake. So we had the tools to do it. Now in his room, we didn't have to use any denoising because it's such a sweet room. So your first line of defense, treat your room. If your room is great, that solves a lot of issues right up front. But not everybody can do that. I have people that are using RX4 and they'll be using RX5, but they have these little porta booths, and it's not an ideal setup, but they're still making it work because the software can help. So remember, your first line of defense is definitely to trick out your room, to get your setup right. And then after that, you can use the tools. I do have to put on my glasses in order to read, and since I have an outline here, but I'm gonna switch over to the software. Every time I switch, there's about a 30-second lag there. So I'll switch, we'll do that, and then I'll be looking, and I do see Kevin's there, and Mindy's there, and Ben, thank you for joining, and Pam just joined. And I'm a little bit behind on this. You may have typed something in and I don't see you instantly, but be sure that you ask questions. I got someone from Western NC. That could be North Carolina, I hope. Tells you my geography is just perfect, but it could be Northern California, but it's not. I know that. Anyway, welcome. I see some people there, and I will be checking those. So I can't answer everyone in real time because, of course, that's just life. But let me share my screen, and we'll go over some things, and then I'll come back and ask for questions, and we'll be going back and forth. And my real screen is sitting over here. I've got two screens, and let me switch for you. And I see John there. Hello, John. Good to see you again. All right. So we have RX5 sitting here, and I'm going to take it full screen. You'll probably want it full screen on your end. Hopefully you can see this here. And let's talk about some of the things that are going on. First thing, if you have RX4, you're not going to instantly jump up and go, wow, oh, it's totally different, because it's not. What they've done, of course, and they do this every generation, is they've built on what they already had. And if you don't know this, but RX4 is pretty darn amazing. And I see Lori and Steve, welcome, glad you're here. And Pete, oh, glad you're back from Wisconsin. So, if you have RX4 and you're an extensive user, then fantastic. You'll feel at home, and then you get some tools that have saved time. And I have to admit, I kind of checked when it went live here the other day. I have over 250 hours of batch processing that went through that I listened to during the beta of this program. And then I've been able to try out instant process. Wasn't originally what they did was they took a copy of RX4 and they put the new features in down here in the blank space. And so we were clicking on icons that don't exist anymore. It wasn't even called instant process. I wanted them to call it like ISO magic or ISO super fragilistic brush, but they ignored me. So it got called instant process, and it works real well. So a couple things, the modules are over here. I'm really in love with the module chains, and I'll talk about that in a second. We're certainly going to talk a little bit more about instant process. If you've seen the other video, then great. But I do have to assume there are people here that did not see that. Plus, this video will be something that people look at 6 months from now. So there will be some overlap, but I'll do my best to also show some different things and a little more depth. I really was working hard for the other one to be short. This I'm not quite as concerned about. So we'll kind of go from there. So there's the background. Hey, I see you there, Richard. Good to see you from Denver. All right, fantastic. So the first thing we'll look at, I'm going to look at module chains. We're going to go ahead and look now in the advanced version. Now, most of what I'm going to show today, let me make sure you know this. Most of what I'm going to show today are going to be in the standard version, just because that's going to be 90% of the people that are doing narration and VO. They're not investing in the high-end one. And the high-end one is primarily for people who work with film and TV, and you get things in from all sorts of locations, and you have to deal with very specific problems. And one of the new things they brought in is this new De-plosive tool. And I will talk about it a little bit. For most of us, the right answer for De-plosive, and the right answer for eliminating plosives is our performance and our mic placement. So we can eliminate 80–90% of our plosives by the way we position our mic and the way we perform. So if you're sitting in the same room all the time and always performing and you have lots of plosives, then there are things you can do. We can change where your mic is, put pop screens on, we can do other things. But like I get audio from all sorts of different people, and some of them they don't have their mic placement exactly right. We'll just say it that way. They could do that a little better. And then they end up recording a 6-hour, 10-hour book, and there's a lot. So in the advanced version, there is something to take out plosives, and it's brilliant. I do have to warn you that it expects the audio to be unprocessed, because it uses some information in the very low end. And like originally when this thing came out, they just put little ugly lips down here, I called them, and we would go ahead and we were testing it out to try to see if it works. And it really works pretty darn well, but you need raw audio. Now, a lot of voiceover people do what I always tell them to do this too. I tell them, go ahead and just take out the low end and take out the high end, because it's not going to get to your book. And after telling them that, then later, if I want to de-plosive, I really need that low end information, because it uses all of the very, very low end as part of it. It's kind of like if you imagine an iceberg, they tell you just a little bit is above. I don't know if it's 10%. I don't remember, I should know that, but I don't know what percentage. Someone can tell me in the thing, what percentage of an iceberg is above the water? I don't know. But a plosive, much of it sits down here in the very low section of the audio here at the low end. And so the software is going through and using that. And then there is a part of it that's where we hear it and notice it. And it uses both of those. It uses the complete iceberg. And so if somebody high passes and takes out the low information, they've taken away part of the iceberg that the software needs to actually work. So I'm going to kind of leave that. I can tell you, if you have unprocessed audio and you have plosives in it, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, but it is something that's in the advanced. And what I do expect, de-reverb was in advanced in version 4. It is now something that is in version 5. And matter of fact, let's go ahead and I'll go back to initial state here. Now you're not going to hear all this I'll just take a little bit of it, but watch this. So this is an interview that was recorded and people that do podcasting, this comes up for them. Most of us doing voiceover or narration don't have this issue, because we get to set up our room. And if you have a problem where you have a lot of reverb in your room, then in an ideal situation, you're fixing your room. But sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you need to fix something and you won't hear it directly. But in this interview that is recorded in a conference room, where it is just plain old a normal conference room. It's got glass and hard surfaces, and that's fine. And so for people that have this specific issue, then they can pull up this is in the standard version, the de-reverb. You can take it and do what you can with almost all the tools here, and that's learn. And then when I go through and I'm going to take all the defaults and I'm going to process that out, and you won't really, over the Hangout, you won't be able to hear much difference, because one, I don't have it plumbed in to show this. I'm actually going to do a boot camp next week that right now it looks to me like it's going to come in at 2.5 or 3 hours. And I'm going to go over all these things in great detail, and I'm going to make sure all my audio is hooked up so you can hear things, but you'll have copies of the file so you can hear it directly. The one thing about doing audio work I find just annoying is that over Hangouts, I can't show somebody very fine details. It's like You know, you see a TV commercial for a great TV, and they show you this great picture, and I think, well, it looks just like my picture. It's because I'm seeing it on my TV. I don't see how great their picture is. Well, the bottom line is de-reverb after it learns, does its thing, after it processes, and then when I listen back here,
my brother and I, we had a family growing up,
and I
sang Southern gospel music,
and I switch back and forth between these two, it's just brilliant in terms of what it's been able to do for this piece of audio. So if someone really wants to see an example, let me know. I mean, because if that is your issue, then go ahead and send me something, and I'll send you a sample where I can give you before and after. But if you have it, then you can, you know, if you have this product anyway, you can do it yourself. But I can show you an example. It's a very, very minor set of people, but some people have to take interviews or do something on the road, or their room is just okay at this point, and it's something that they're going to deal with over time. But for whatever reason, where they're at today, they can't treat the room effectively. Maybe they're renting, maybe they're leasing, or that kind of thing. So then this tool is excellent, and it's now part of standard. So that's something I didn't go over the other day, but there are certain people that this will help. For most of us, no big deal. I mean, I'm going to treat the room first. That's the right answer to that. Okay. So if you have an issue with reverb, though, there's a great tool to deal with that. And if you process audio for other people, then you want to have advanced, because these tools come in handy. You don't know what you're going to get week to week, month to month. That's where this really comes in. So let me show you a couple other things that I talked about on the other video. I mentioned that there's a gentleman that sent me something. He records uh, video games, animation video games. And it's really funny because he sent me I don't know, it's a 50-second, he sent me multiple minutes, but I cut out 50 seconds of it here. His name is TJ Storm. This guy's great. And I'll play it. Let me turn up my volume here, and you'll get an idea, even through my microphone, what. Yeah, he's fighting somebody. Ugh. Ugh. Okay. Yeah. So whatever, it's a fight. He has to, he's got hours of this stuff where he is grunting, and he says lines too. There's all sorts of lines, and so you can tell that they're building 40,000 little snippets for a video game. But what he didn't notice was in the background, you can see these little lines here, and there is a very faint buzz that is going on. And whoops, I just had instant process on, and it processed it, attenuated that, turn that off. Um, and so he didn't notice that up front. So this is really cool because there's something new. I took the corrective EQ. Now, a couple things about this. First thing I'm always doing with audio, and anyone who's been around me already knows this, I tend to brick wall, take the top. Let me see, if you're not aware of that term, at the very top of your audio, if you're doing audiobooks, if you're doing certain things, anything above about 13, 14K will never make it through to a book from virtually any publisher. There will be no information up there. They're just going to cut it off. And so I cut it off right up front. Like, for example, you'll see that there's this line right up here. Let me change my tools. There's a line right up here at the top. Well, this information is so high. Uh, Most adults who are past, I'll just round it, past about 40 would never hear this anyway, because it's up at 16, 17, and at the volume level it's at, they just won't hear it. Now, if somebody's over 50, I don't want to say no chance, but little chance. And then this audio that's up here, unless you're a dog or want to be, then no one's going to hear these things up here. So because no one's going to hear it, I just cut it out. I'm not going to try to process that. And then there's things at the low end here. He has a little, I don't know what happened right here in the audio, but there is something that is a very, very low end signal, and nobody's going to hear that either. That's not going to get through. So when you take the corrective EQ, you could do this with the old one. You brick wall it, and you can adjust these things. It's easy to change your frequency here. All these things, these are called nodes, the technical term for them, and you can turn each one of them on. They're actually known as, they're showing them here as bands. I think people that have been working with audio for a while tend to call them nodes as far as grabbing it. And you can grab it and you can drag them, and and then if you double click, it'll put them back to the defaults. But the first thing I do is I almost always go through and just process this whole thing out. And if you see, oh, but I had a selection there. So let me go ahead and make sure we do this and do this to all the audio. And there you go. And you'll notice in the background, I've chopped off the top and I've chopped off the bottom, and they're gone. And then I don't have to worry about it for any other processing. But no one's going to hear that stuff anyway. Now, if you're doing music, if you're doing other things, there are things where you do want the information there. But for what we do, we don't. But here's what happens. Now, I can do this same thing, the same process. There's a very sophisticated process where you can use the denoiser if you really know what you're doing, and you could take this stuff out. But you have to be really careful with the denoiser, because what most people do, I'm going to copy it over here. That's going to be this one here. Move this guy right here. I use the denoiser. Get Corrective EQ out of the way. I don't know if you, well, I'll make it easy for you to see. I was just going to say, I don't know if you can see this here, but we'll kind of look about here. And what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in. Now, most of you know that you can go and put your mouse right over here in this area, and you can roll the scroll wheel. And if you do, you zoom in vertically. And then you can drag this up or down so that you can reposition it on your screen. Now, not everybody knows that, but you know that, I know that. And it allows us to zoom in on any section. So some people are, hey, I need my eyeglasses, the magnifying glass, to see this stuff. And you say, well, you really don't. You can zoom in. So this isn't supposed to be a tips and tricks session, but hey, I can't help myself. But what I did was I took out this audio in between, and I used the denoiser. And while you can still see it, that's sometimes okay, because really it's not what you can see, it's what you can measure and what you can hear. So one of the things is, if I take, and I'll display this, and then I'm going to look like this, and I take right here, then what happens is I can tell you that none of these lines that are still here that I see visually are peaking over 68, which is virtually unhearable by anybody. Okay. Now, what people don't know is down here at the bottom, I blanked out the low end information so that my metering could just be measuring what's happening up top. And it even includes some noise that's down here. So these might even be fainter than that. I think if I was smart, I would have done this. Let me do this. Watch this. When you're measuring things, you have to make sure you're measuring what you think you're measuring. And RMS is always measured full frequency, top to bottom. So I'm going to take that and delete that out and just get all that low end information out. And then I'm going to measure a little strip here and just see what those things are. Yeah, they're even lower than I thought before. So you're at minus 71 for all these things. I use the denoiser. So even though you can see something a little bit in the lines, that's okay. In the boot camp, I'll go over exactly how we did this, because one of the things that happened was I made a decision that I was going to take out the noise, but leave the background ambience. So I wanted the room tone in this thing to be the same room tone that he had. You can easily take it out. If you're willing to take out some other stuff, you can take it all out with the denoiser. But here's what I did instead for him. I went to his original audio. I'm going to go back to the initial state here, and I used the new Corrective EQ and did this. I built myself a little notch filter, and it's pretty slick. Now, most people don't do this, but there's something called a spectrum analyzer that's sitting back here, and you can use these too. And with that, I take and put in a little notch, a little section here, and what you'll see, let me make this bigger. And you can adjust this whole thing. And it depends. Now I have 2 monitors, so I'll throw this on my second monitor and I'll adjust it. But here's the great thing. Each one of those little lines that we see going across the screen horizontally is sitting here, and this is one of them. See, this one's at 8,000. And then if I move the Corrective EQ out of the way and I look at my scale, you see on the right here, it shows 8,000 right here. And that's that line. And that corresponds with this right here. So now when my Corrective EQ is up, which is right here, I can take a node here and grab it, and I either can move this left to right. Here's the frequency right here, 79, 73, and I can move this. Now, to try to get it right to 8,000, good luck. Okay, I mean, you can. Maybe you can, I don't know, I can't. So I double click on this here, and I just directly set it. And I tend to do that for all sorts of things. All these people working with me in private, they go, yeah, Don, he doesn't drag things around. He goes and types in numbers. And then you can drag this for gain up and down. Now, if I drag it left to right, then you'll see it can change my frequency. And then there's something called Q. I don't know who named that. I think it was some guy from the James Bond series. I'm not sure. But Q is how narrow or how wide this EQ filter is going to work in terms of how quickly is it going to kick in. For this sort of thing, these are very narrow, and so we're going to take and adjust them down to maximum Q, which is 400. I could have typed that in. I'm going to now set this to 8,000. And then the gain, I'm going to put this, so when you look over here on the spectrum analyzer, you see that that's sitting at about 79, and these other things are down here at 120. And if you do the math there, you've got about a 30 dB differential between where this spike is and the bottom, but I'll set this at minus 20. Now, people go, well, why don't you take it all out? And you go, no, because the rule is you don't need to take all of it out. You need to just make it quiet enough that 98% of the people can never hear it. When you're doing audio repair, it is not about perfect, meaning that it could never be heard under any circumstances. It's about having it blending in with the background to the point where, A, nobody notices you ever touched it. And the less you take out, the better off you are. Now, let me repeat that again. Always take out the least amount that you can, because that's a very good thing to do. You'll get better quality audio. If I can get away with this at minus 20, I'll do minus 20. Even though you'll still be able to visually see it here in a second. Let me get rid of this. I'll take the corrective EQ. I'm going to turn off the high pass and low pass. It won't hurt anything. Yeah, I'll leave those on. You'll see it all work. But watch, I've only done one. Now, what I did the first time was I went through and set up one of these little nodes here, one of these little filters. For each one of them up here, I did this one that's at 8, but I'm just working on the one at 8 as an example. It's number 6 here. And I went through and I'll process this. And you'll watch that line there on number 8. And number 8 got a lot fainter. You can barely see it now. And then the question is, was that enough? So then what I do is you go in and you make sure that you have nothing in the low end. And I'll just blank that out. Delete. And so I have nothing. I'll even get rid of this. And then I'll measure this and kind of say, okay, what was happening for RMS? Now, I do see a question over there. I'm going to answer a question here in just 1 second. I'll take this and I'll measure. I measure everything. All right, so minus 69. And now that includes all my other ones. Now, the one thing you can't do is figure out which one. These other ones are brighter. So I can tell you from experience, that just means that this is below 69. And that's going to be fine. No one's ever going to hear it. So I don't have to get it perfect. But you can also tell when let me zoom in here. Let me close this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We're looking at this 8K line here. We'll zoom in. I'll get 8K right in the middle. I'm going to zoom a little more. You still can see it, but don't let that fool you. It also took out a tiny, tiny little bit out of every single piece of audio here. But it's so small that when you play it back, you just hear the guy grunting. And you hear him talking and you cannot tell. Nobody knew we were there, and that was the idea. But if somebody's really anal and they don't want to see anything taken out of here, then you could go over and you could do it with the denoiser. So I'm going to check for questions. Is the corrective EQ already set up at a default? They'll take out the very top and very bottom. No. So we just need to run through a process, or do we need to set defaults based on our voice? That was Mindy. Excellent question, Mindy. When the corrective EQ comes up, number 1, it starts off, well, actually, it is in this configuration, which they call default, which is just nothing, which is fine. And you actually go through and you turn on what you want. And for example, and it is voice specific. I can tell you flat out, though, for most people, we're going to instantly go through here and we're going to change them to the brick wall setting if we're doing any type of VO, because we just don't want anything at the low end and nothing. We don't want anything past a certain point. 14,000 is great for audiobooks. You could even go, I go lower. I think I go 13. I've never seen anything over 12 through ACX. If you're going through another publisher, this may not be appropriate. And sometimes I do work with other publishers where they don't want anything taken out. And sometimes I cheat and I have a gentle slope. I'll take off a low end. But over here, we're also going to use the brick wall setting. For most men, male voices, we're going to be up somewhere between 80 to 100. and it's not it doesn't mean at 100 we're at 100% gone. It means we're close to that. And then when it comes down to female voices, I'm going to be anywhere from say 95 to 115, somewhere in there. It just depends on the voice. And I always you can preview it and listen to it, and there's some techniques for doing that. So someone wants to see how exactly I set that, I'll show that in the boot camp next week. I have a whole technique for doing it and getting it dialed in for your voice, but I don't need any of these other bands. Okay. So excellent question there, Mindy. It's definitely nothing to begin with. They don't turn on anything. They don't assume anything, although there are some great presets. And if you don't know anything about it and you're kind of curious, you can go ahead and look at what did they do. Now, the problem is this doesn't tell anybody why. So if somebody has a nasal resonance, so their nose is a little extra, they get extra nose, then this will help, because what people don't know is it's pretty widely established among people that have been doing this a while. If you tell them you have a sound, they'll know where to start. And that doesn't mean they'll have it. This for some people would be better off sitting about here, and for some people might sit better here, but it's still a general idea. And laptops are notorious for having microphones that overemphasize the low mids. So they put in some things that will kind of help. And there's something called dialogue enhance. And while I won't explain it, where did that one go? Dialogue center. Okay. So it's good. It's a good starting spot, and you can learn some things, and you go, well, why? How does my voice sound with this and that? And some people it'll sound better, some people it won't. But it's a good starting point. It's a good way to learn. It's a great tool. It's extremely well done. Okay. So I'm going to leave that for now. And if you have other questions about it, what you can see is that I notched out something here, and it did a pretty amazing job. I'll put it back to just normal. And this line that I worked on, the 8K line, is much fainter than this line that's right here. And all I would have had to do is 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, put in 5 little notches there. And when I did it in the real world for him, it took me less than 2 minutes. And then he could batch it through everything. And we used that tool, and he was able to run all his audio through it. And it was brilliant. Just turned out great. You'd never know we were there. If somebody looks at it visually in another tool like this, they would see that there's something taken out there. But in terms of listening, that it's so little information taken away that it's just totally transparent. And then if somebody, has a visual thing where they don't want to see anything gone, I took out a couple right here, and I used a rather advanced technique with the denoiser, where I left in all the audio that's in between all these notches. I didn't touch anything here, and then I only took out these. And this one, because someone will look at this and go, oh, I can see something. Yes, you can. But if you measure that, you'll see that that's, I think it's minus 70. So who cares if you can see something that's minus 70? RX will show it to you. That doesn't mean you'll see it. Okay. So that's a great thing. Now I'm going to show you my, let me check questions here, see if there's anything that I really need to deal with. And I'll just say hi to people. And I'll say, oh, I see Pam down there. And if I'm going to follow this, but you're here, oh, you'll follow it, because I'm going to try to make sure you follow it. The next thing I'm going to show off, I showed this the other day. These are called module chains. And these module chains are pretty darn sweet. Now, I have a narrator here that I happen to be married to, so I can say this. I've accused her sometimes of narrating with popcorn in her mouth. It's probably not true. It's more like Pop Rocks or something that gave her chewy, crunchy mouth noise. I mean, she's usually great, but there was a couple sessions she did, and I was just like, "What are you? Hey, don't do whatever you did." Now, unfortunately, I didn't process her audio for a few days after, so we had no idea. We couldn't go back and go, what was wrong with you that day? Don't do that again. And we all know, if you do enough of this stuff, sometimes you get things that are different for a single day. That's where having RX is a real win, because you can solve problems that are not part of your norm, and you have a complete toolkit to do that. And Kevin's asking, he has a high pass on the mic, and it depends on if you have. So he's saying, because I said, if you're going to use De-plosive, then, or you're going to cut things off using the corrective EQ, high pass there. I personally prefer to high pass in the software, just because today's computers are so darn good. The technology is just absolutely phenomenal in terms of what can happen with the modern equipment. So what's going on in software is usually way better than the little switches and electronics that they have. Doesn't hurt anything to cut out to high pass on your microphone, but I don't anymore. The software has just gotten so good. I now prefer to do it in software. We all do that because, but if you had problems where you had plosives and you had the advanced version, I'd turn all that stuff off and just do it all post. It's easy. You're going to you need to take out the high end anyway. So you're going to go through and you just throw that in an either a module chain. You'd have that corrective EQ in here and you have a preset on it, or you would go ahead and you do it. I do it in batch processing. So hopefully that answers your question there, Kevin. And is it ever necessary to further process it? It just depends. You have to kind of look at it and see what it is. It's just because I cut off 10 dB, when you really look at what I'm setting corrective EQ to, I actually am taking off way more than 10 dB. Their gentlest slope, let me put this back to default. So I turn on high pass here and I look at the slopes that are available. There's 12 dB. So remember, you're talking about a slope of 10 dB. There's 12 dB, and you can see it's a slope. And there's a starting point for that high pass on your mic. This is 24, which you can see is steeper, and here's 48. And I'm doing what is called brick wall. And there's still a slope to it on the low end. That's just the way it goes. If you do the math for, it's actually the same on the high end. People don't, that's a whole other concept. I'll talk about that offline if someone wants to know. But the point is that you can see that a 10 dB high pass that's built into some microphones, that's not that much, and it's a gentle slope. So it depends on where you set it and where they set it in the microphone. Those are usually at 60 or 80, maybe 100, not usually quite that high. So a lot of times you still have to do something, even if your mic takes out that, because some of this stuff can come in after your mic. Some electronics do. It just depends on your audio. All right, I hope that helped you there, Kevin. And so we go to this module chain here, and what we can do, and I'll just show you one that I have. And what I did was, in the demo that I did the other day, I implied that this was really good for declicks and decrackles. And what I wasn't able to show, and after I was reviewing it and editing it, I think, oh gosh, I implied that that's the only thing this was good for. Well, they put up if you're now, yeah, most of us are not going to be recording drums, as I have, and probably will again in the future. But you have a bunch of presets for a voiceover where they assume that you needed to de-plosive, and then maybe you needed to use the leveler and the EQ match. And so this is similar to doing batch processing. If you haven't done the batch processing, by the way, they've moved where it is. That used to be under the file menu, and they moved it over here. And I argued with them about it, and nobody listened to me. I thought, well, they're just like my kids. And listen. So you have your batch processing here. These two are related. You can do virtually everything you can do here in the batch processing, but there are times where this is a totally different animal. So don't get confused. There are many times where you could use them interchangeably. If you're one of those few people who's doing narration, and if you're doing narration and you use Pro Tools or you use some certain DAWs, then you might be doing this through your DAW. And then this module chain is just brilliant because you're not doing any batch processing. So if you're using Connect and going back and forth, then the module chains, you can't do batch processing. Batch processing is part of the standalone. So if you don't use standalone, then you can use the module chains to get you something that'll run a whole bunch of things with one single click. So I want to make sure that people are aware that when you set up this module chain, what you do is you say, what steps does it take to process my audio? And I'm first going to, and let me just find mine. It's very often, if I've set up your chain, sometimes, most of the time, I will have 2 passes of declick rather than 1 heavy pass. And then there are some cases where, when I look at this one, this is a very special one where I'm doing crazy things. Don't do this at home. This is set up at 8.6. And then the second pass here, I think it's in the 3s. No, it's in the 5s. So This is the kind of thing I did for my spouse's popcorn mouth, where I needed to do something very well. I had to do two things. I either was going to sit there and hand go through this whole thing and uh, do it by hand to take out all these mouth clicks and pops that she had. This one book, kind of multiple couple chapters in there, or I was going to set up a process and just run it through. And I didn't want to sit there. It was going to take me hours to do it all by hand, and it's not something I normally deal with. So I set up one of these things, and it just works great. And so Mindy's asking, does batch processing mean we're using multiple corrective actions at once? It's a way to use multiple actions on multiple files. Batches allow us to do in multiple files, multiple actions. A module chain is always, you have to have a file open and you run it manually, and then it will run all of these steps. You can set up a batch file to run all these steps, and then you feed it files. This one works on the open one only. So if I want to run this same process on all of these, I would switch to this one and I would say process. And you can, by the way, you can switch to the other one while it's running, and I could do process. I'm doing this one, and in the background, it's doing both of them. So I've done that before and ran over and done some email while this is going on. I've even set 2 or 3 up. I'll cancel that. I'll undo all that. I'll go back here and undo it. And it shows up in the undo as well. So anyway, there's they're subtle, the differences, but they have different purposes, and you can use them for basically different things. And you can be very sophisticated, because at the end of the day, when I'm running this aggressive with the D-click module, where it's running at 8.6, I just never run that on full spectrum. I can go through and do a partial spectrum here like this. And when you do something this, because most people, their mouth noise, we all have if somebody has that issue, you're going to find that 80-90% of their issues are within a very small band. And if you have to run this stuff full spectrum, then it can damage your audio a little bit. But when you go ahead and run it on a minor subset like this that you pick, and then you run all these things, you can run them amazingly aggressive and solve problems that just frankly aren't possible if you do it this way, where you're doing the whole spectrum. Because when you're running that aggressive, it might see something in the low end that normally wouldn't be something it would touch, but we've got it set so aggressive, it's just looking every place for everything, and it wrecks something down here. But we need the aggression for our subset, but we don't need it for the rest of it. So you can do some amazing things. So anyway, you can do all this stuff, but for things that you need for every single file, then I'll set up a batch process, and I run hours of that through, and then I audit it afterward. So they're complementary tools. They have different purposes. At first, they strike people as being the same, and you get to build your own chains. You can drag these around to where, by the way, location does matter. Anyone that's worked with me privately knows I'm really big on that. The order you do it does matter. Because the second item doesn't happen until after the first one completes. And there are certain actions that if I take the decrackle and put that in first before I declick, well, it'll work, but it's not optimum because of just the way the technology works. You, as a rule, and if you know enough, you can break all these rules. So don't, if you're already advanced, anything I'm saying here is a guideline. It is not a rule. I've switched these all around, done them backwards. I've run things at absolute max, but I've also, I'm listening to it, and I've also messed up a lot of stuff. So make sure you're really well aware of the order that things should be based on what you're doing. But when it gets to this decrackle, it's already done 2 levels of declick, which is very different than if I have decrackle first and then I'm doing 2 declicks. I have to audit that, and I'm going to go over next week in my boot camp the right order to do it, how to build these things, because the location matters, what you put in there matters, how aggressive matters, but this is a real power tool. Let me look at questions here. Have there been any change to the basic declick, or decrackle functions in RX5? From Richard there. There's always tweaks behind the scenes that they don't talk about. I talked with the guy who actually wrote the declicker and the denoiser. That's his baby. When RX4 came out. And RX4 had some things behind the scenes where he had tweaked the algorithms for better mouth noise. And yet I could not find a single word of that on any piece of documentation from anybody. And what he kind of admitted to me, I gotta be careful about how I say this, but the marketing people they just figure most people, that level of detail just confuses them. So they don't put every last possible tweak, change in their marketing material. They don't disclose every possible change they make behind the scenes, but I can guarantee you there are little tweaks in everything, because the guy who does it is a nut in a really good way. He's a genius, and he's a signal processing. He teaches it all over the world, and he also does visual, because the math to take a photograph and denoise a photograph is similar, almost. There's variations, but conceptually the same process as denoising audio. Audio and visual use some of the same mathematics. So behind the scenes, there's always stuff. They've sped up a bunch of things. A simple example is and just to give you an idea of one of the many things that are undocumented but got tweaked, was if I take this file and I open up this stats window, then it comes up, and let's see, how long is this file? I don't even know. It will come up and it almost instantly gives me the RMS for the complete file. And let's see how long this file is. So it's a 14-minute file. And if I take it and I highlight this, but then I go and I tell it to compute the whole thing. Behind the scenes, they tweak the algorithm that does the calculation here. And on a 15-minute file here, this used to take it maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds to get that number. And now it gets it in 1.5. I mean, it's almost instant. You can kind of see if I do this, that it gets that instantly. And if I do this, it comes up almost instantly. If I do almost the whole file, it comes up almost instantly for the initial calculation. And then it goes in the background and verifies some other things. But it's an example. I'm not saying so. The other things are behind the scenes. These guys are always tweaking based on feedback that comes in. And I've had a very long discussion with the guy who works with the mouth noise stuff, the declicking and decrackle. All that stuff originated in vinyl restoration and restoration stuff. And they now know a lot of us use it for voice and other things. So there's all sorts of little things that now, I mean, I've sent them files and I go, look, there's something right here, and your declicker missed it, and it's sitting out here in the open. That shouldn't happen. And there's things sitting here, and I mean, I've sent them very explicit files that show what's missing for us voiceover people. So behind the scenes, there's always I can tell you all over the place. I got, ooh, that's so much faster than the last version. So not everything is documented, but there are all sorts of little tweaks throughout the whole program that no one will ever talk about, because the marketing people think that that's not relevant for the 98% of the people out there. Okay. Hope that answers your question there, Richard. All right. So you can build module chains here. These are very powerful. You definitely want to know about them. And we've got the corrective EQ there. The other things that are new, what else is new? What was the third one that I did? Oh, gosh. The thing that I've done thousands of already. And let's go over to a different file. Let's go over to clicks here. And I talked about this the other day, but now we can do it a little more depth. Instant process is a thing that my very last audit, if I have a couple things that didn't get caught by the declicker and the decrackler, because some of them, if they're just so big, and I just took it away there from attenuate. I had that turned on. It's called instant process. And let me move this up on the screen so you can see it, because I do know that you're not going to be able to see it if it's too low. All right, now you'll be able to see it. And what you have here is that we can use different tools, of course, and they're really smart about the way this is implemented. At first, I just thought, all right, this is like auto heal, and they're just going to, steal auto heal and do maybe a better version of it. Well, they did a dramatically better version of it, because you get to pick your tool, and it takes all your settings here. If you saw my other video, you get to set this up. Now, what I had done before was I did something similar before. You can do this in version 4. What I find, though, when I'm doing a lot of it is, at first I thought, yeah, well, what's not too big of a deal, because I still have my keystroke set up And I would not have this here. This would be sitting over here, and I'd have this sitting up here. I even have a default for that. I'll put it to my standard. And I have a keystroke. I just pressed my keystroke and it just did it. And, it seems like not a big deal to go through a whole file, but if you're doing, a 6-hour book, and that means every time you drag and when you're done, you press a keystroke. I don't know. I might have 400 of those that I do in a 6-hour book where I go through, I see this, and I would be listening to this, and I'd be finding the areas I don't like. And then I would be doing this, and then I'd be going back and listening again. So I'm doing, I'm painting something, pressing my keystroke, going back and listening. And I've kind of got my fingers all trained to do that. And so I go, okay, well, what's the big deal here? I mean, I already can do this. I figured out my method to do it pretty quickly. And what I figured out is, let me take this all the way back here. Undo, 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 undo. Um, when I have this thing turned on, it's just so much faster. And there are some things now, I've done so many of them. After I listen through it, I hear something, I can see them. I know this is going to bother me. And I know based on the way I have it set up for this file, then this is going to take it out. And I almost don't need to audit some of those fixes anymore. In the beginning, I would go through and I would audit every single one of those fixes. I would go ahead and I would do this. I'd press my keyboard shortcut and then I'd do this and I'd go back. I don't need to do some of them. Now, if I'm looking at something that I haven't seen 4,000 times, I always audit it by listening back. So here's the point. At first, you need to listen to everything, okay? Don't skip it. Don't cheap out on that step. But later, as you get more experience with it, like everything else, you can take, you can take shortcuts on things when you know what you're doing and have the experience. What's really great about this is there are times where I need de-click instead. In this case, there's some clicks here, and I'm not playing them for you. I played them in the other one if you want to hear them. The de-click will work just as well in this case, but it's smart about what it just did. And see, the de-clicker is not even open, and it doesn't need to be open. This doesn't need to be open. I only open them in the demos to show you. I have them sitting on my other desktop because sometimes I will see something here and I instantly look at it and go, oh, I want to tweak to that. I really want that sitting here. And I end up doing this. And oh, I still had it on T-click and it took it out. Okay. Amazingly, it actually took it out there. It did what I wanted. It did what I told it, not what I wanted, because I really wanted this. And then there are keyboard shortcuts to switch between all of these and the tools. And then this is also super. I live on time frequency selection. I'm always right there doing this, but there are some things where I need the lasso tool. And you probably already know if you hold down the brush tool, you can then go over and adjust the size of the brush. Sometimes you don't usually need this, but you can do that, undo that. You can adjust that. I used to keep this down somewhere between 10 and 20. Just depends on what I'm doing. Um, but that's a great thing to be able to adjust that. And there are certainly, I used a magic wand. A lot of times with the magic wand, I don't use instant process because I want to see what it selects first and see what it gets and then make my decision about what I like. Now, if there's a reoccurring problem, then I'll use the magic wand. If it's a really obvious issue, the magic wand is great. And there's a couple other tools I use to get through there. But this tool is brilliant. And this tool, in my mind, is worth the upgrade price right there. If you're using version 4 and you go through, there's two types of people. There's people that divide people into two types, and there's all the others. Or there's really two types of people here. Some people that listen to their audio before they ship it out, and some people that don't. Okay. If you're one of those like me that listens to your audio before it goes out the door, then instant process is worth it because you just sit here and you sit here on this tool, and as your audio is going by, you're saying, oh, there's this, there's that, and let me go over to this file here and have a bunch of audio. And in this case, as you're going through and you're listening, you see some things in the audio, and right there, I can tell you that's going to bother me. I'll hear it. When I see it, and I can see some things in here, I'll see it, and I'll be able to take spectral repair. And this I actually would use a de-clicker on right here. But I'd love getting just a little subset of that. I would switch this over to de-click and go here, and it's gone. And I audit it too, but I'm going to end up sitting and using this tool. I really don't have to think very much about it. I've done now. I'm sure I've done a few thousand of them easy, and then listened to them and then verified they were what I wanted. And see, in this case, I actually want this weighted before. Most of the time, this is weighted after. I can switch it back, so this is up and running and works really, really well. Kevin's asking, what processor chain was used to repair consistent room tone issue? Oh, most of the time that's going to be denoise. If my room tone is not ideal, most of the time, Kevin, I'm going to be sitting on denoise. I would find a section of room tone, and it really depends on what you're talking about there. If I have room tone that's consistently just okay, then I'm going to run probably denoise over all of it. If I need to create a room tone track, then I'm going to do something else. And of course, I'm a measure kind of guy. I don't do anything. I listen to it and I measure. And so I've turned off instant process here. And like there's room tone right here. And that's sitting at minus 64. Now, funny thing is, that looks kind of black. And I'll look at black on your screen. Let me go full screen here. So you'll go, oh, that's really black. That's really dark. That's really only minus 66. And if I take the display, you'll see that there is room tone there. That's different. You see how there actually is some noise in there. That's really not noise. That's normal. A normal room will have some noise in it. I see people that have this audio. Oh, hold on. I see people that have audio like this, where they get to it. I get the little section, and it looks like that. Now, that is totally different than this. Now, at first, if they're looking at the display, you cannot tell visually the difference between here and here. By the way, this is way beyond the tips and tricks for the new version. That's okay. That's why live is live. All right. If I don't want to talk about this stuff, I wouldn't have done it live. All right. So you can see the difference though between these two, where this is going to sound very different. It's funny. I'll hear this instantly. I don't need to see it to hear it. When somebody does this, where they just silence their audio. This is, watch this. If I measure this, remember I told you I'm a measure kind of guy. So we measure this, and let's do it with the other one right here. Oh, because I didn't go all the way to the top and bottom. So this measurement's going to include this. Otherwise, these numbers would show minus infinity. For what the area that I blanked out there would be minus infinity, but there's just a little bit of stuff at the top and bottom. I'll just tell you that. So I don't need to see this visually to instantly hear it. If you leave this hole in your audio because you blanked it out, then not only am I going to hear it, here's the thing that really works, or why you need these tools. If you do this, people who are untrained will notice that this never occurs in the real world. All right, so this is bonus. I mean, I know you guys are here to see RX5, but I'll just tell you flat out that my mom, she's wonderful. I love her, but she's not Miss Audio. She just doesn't know anything about it. She'd be listening to a book, and she'll notice it just doesn't sound right, because this is an unnatural sound. It does not occur in the real world, and that much contrast. Even people that are untrained will hear this hole in my audio. And so, I mean, maybe you don't care, but if you do, you get your room tone right. Okay, there's a difference between room tone and silence, and you don't want this. So you can't always see it, but if you know how to use the tools, you can do it. So I'm gonna look at questions here. So if I'm gonna consistent room tone, definitely denoise is probably the thing I'm gonna do. But to be honest with you, I'd have to see it. Sometimes it's a combination of things. It might be denoise. It might be a two-step denoise. So it just really depends on the exact issue we're dealing with. So I hope that answers that question. Let me see a couple other things here that I need to go. Oh, make sure though, instant process looks like it's just doing some things that are simple, but I have to tell you that like the D-click is brilliant, and it switches back and forth between two styles of D-click. Attenuate is taking your settings. If there's any questions on that, ask away. If you already have a batch chain, is there a way to move it from RX4 to RX5, Lori says. And the answer is yes, there's a way to move it. You recreate it. So that's no. All the presets you can bring over. There's a couple though that the processes have changed just a little bit, but almost all, like I'll tell you, the first ones here, D-click, D-hum, D-noise, those will come over. Spectral repair comes over. I mean, you can bring those over easily, because if you go into any module, you go to Spectral Repair here, and you click on this, and you say Explore Presets. You can go find all your own old presets, and when you choose Import, you can go over on your drive and show it where the old ones are, and you can bring them over. And you can do that for almost all presets. So if you built your module, if you built your batch process so that you can see I haven't brought over all mine. If you look at if I bring up RX4, then and we show that, and I look at some of my batch processes here, and you can have both open at once. You can see here that I have maybe 15 batch processes, and they're for different people at different times and different books, and whether their air conditioner's on or I've got air conditioner on, air conditioner off, different publishers. And I don't even have all of my archive, some of them, because sometimes it's like too many of them, and I take them out. I get rid of them at some point, but I haven't brought them all over here to 5. Some of them I've just done manually, some of them then I take them away, and because I was testing. So in other words, in all the test versions, as I install, I uninstalled to put in the final version, and when I uninstalled, it wasn't worth bringing them over every time, so I'd set them up. So anyway, you have tons of them, you recreate them, but as long as you started off with your own presets on every module, you can rebuild the whole thing in 10 minutes. All right, and it's a one-time thing, so it's not that big a deal. But you do have to do it for the batches. You do not have to do it for the individual modules, with a couple exceptions based on if they change something major in terms of the interface, then a preset wouldn't come over. But I can't think of anything, as mostly in the betas, where we would get to a point where they changed something, and now all of a sudden all our presets didn't work in that one module. But that really had nothing to do with going to 4 to 5. 4 to 5 will be pretty straightforward. So hopefully that helps, knowing the difference in purpose of room, tone, and silence. Oh, okay, Ben, I'm glad that helped you there. Kevin, I'm looking at questions here and making sure that I got those questions answered, and seeing if there's any that I missed that I can go over right now. Okay, looks like so are we looking for a fairly homogeneous color and a horizontal plane, Mindy says. It depends. One, I love your use of words. My vocabulary, that's almost too big for me. Um, on it really depends on what you're looking at. So that's hard to say, but you can see some of my audio here. I'd have to, we need a little more context for that. The colors aren't, I mean, between words, it's going to look like it's quiet. And you can see right here, it looks like there's nothing there. But of course, the instant process just kicked in. By the way, undo is my biggest friend. Took me a little while. By the way, this will be something that you should know. When you first start using this, you turn the darn thing on, and then you go to highlight. If you've been using 4 extensively, like I used to highlight, I'd have to highlight this first, and then I'd have to go pick my module and do something. Well, yeah, if you have this thing turned on, it just automatically does it. It's like, oh, cripe, I forgot about that. So there is a transition period if you're going 4 to 5, and you did what I did, which is I've done 10,000, I don't know, whatever. I've done hundreds and thousands of these fixes where I've gone ahead and highlighted something and then picked my thing to fix it with, my tool, and done it and used my keystrokes. And all of a sudden, the darn tool is just instantly doing something because I forget that this is here because I've spent, a year doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of audio of hours of audio in this, and therefore there is a transition. Now, if you're new, then you're just going to know, turn this on. I do have a keystroke also set up to turn on and off instant process and to switch between some of the tools. So you can set all that up. But it is funny sometimes because I'll have this thing turned on. But depends on, in terms of what's happening in terms of the visual, it really just depends on what you want. And like this looks like it's blank, but it's not, it's 66. And if I turn up the intensity, you can see that looks blank, but it's not. So room tone should look kind of like that. This is what decent room tone should look like, where it's a little bit speckly, but when you see it under the native, it almost looks black, and that's a pretty good look for that. So, all right, let me look back at the little questions here. If losing, let's see, if there's a way to notice an area that probably needs fixing. Yeah, I don't really, Mindy, to be honest with you, I'm not clear on that question. What I can tell you is, if you can read x-rays, you can read this. After a while, I've gotten to the point where in terms of colors, when you know the display and you're working with it regularly, I can scan through this, and when it's playing, I'll usually see something visually that's going to bother me before I hear it. I can tell you right here, this is probably right, let me highlight it here. Right here is a, I don't know, they call it a glottal stroke, but there's some narrators that have this little sound in the back and in their mouth, and right there I recognize that pattern, and I can tell you what that is before I even hear it. There's going to be a little bump right down here that I'm probably going to take out, and it's like reading an X-ray. This is, oh, and for those of you that don't know, I mean, it's there's the traditional view if you want the waveform view, and that's always there. If you're new to RX, then you're going like, what's this view? So the spectrogram view is sitting here, but most of you already know that. Anyway, you can read this, and after you've done this a little while, you'll recognize what's a problem and what's, quote, normal. And like, this is too faint for me to worry about right here. I'm not going to have to worry about that, but I see it. And some of those things, if that's sitting out in the middle, then I might paint it out. But it just depends on what you're doing as far as this is room tone between words and clicks. This is a little click right here. And it's at the, I recognize that because it's at the end of a phrase, and that's a normal place. Many narrators are going to have that little click. And that one I can tell visually, I'm probably going to hear.
For trouble.
Yep, for trouble. You'll never hear that over the wire, but I can tell you she's saying trouble, click. And so for me, I would have gone through and done that.
A heap of trouble.
Heap of trouble, and now that's gone. So I just painted it out right there, and I visually saw that one. When I undo that, I can see it there, and this is already, I think it's been declicked. I don't know. Actually, this is a raw file. I set it aside because it had a noise in it, so it's a raw file. It hadn't been through the declicker. And I'm not sure if the declicker would have gotten that one, but whether it did or didn't, you get to the point where you can see that visually. And right there is a totally transparent, nobody will ever know I was there and took out that click. So I see it, you'll see it. There's little ones in here that I look at it, I'm looking at it, and you stare at it long enough and you hear them first, and then you go ahead, and after a while you recognize what they look like visually. Okay. Yeah, for anyone that's done x-rays, and I've never done x-rays, but I broke my shoulder 5 years ago. I don't know, might be a little longer than that. And they showed me on the x-ray, and it's like, oh, I kind of see it now that you pointed out to me. I see it. To be honest with you, if I had looked at the x-ray, I wouldn't have known that I had a broken shoulder because it was just a hairline fracture. But when they pointed it out to me, yes, I saw it, and they zoomed in and that kind of thing. So that's the way that works. There's way more. Okay. This is a deep product, so I'm going to end with this. This thing is crazy deep. If you have version 4, you know, whether you make the upgrade, if you do this, if you listen to your files at the end, then this instant process is worth the whole price of the upgrade all by itself, because I'm going to paint these things out. And whether this needed to go or not, I just, as the audio is going by, I can see them, and you can paint things out. And when you get good at this instant process in terms of figuring out what your settings should be, it allows you to do things, and it's even faster than doing it the old-fashioned way. Okay, you can do it in 4. I've done just, you know, couple thousands of hours in 4 without having this tool, but it makes it easier because I've now done a few hundred hours with it, and I can tell you I'm faster, and all I care about is being faster. And if you're upgrading for $90, and if you use it for a year, then it's $8, $9 a month. And so therefore, you know, it depends. If it saves you an hour a month, is that worth $9? To me, it is, but you know, it may or may not be with you. You don't have to upgrade. I don't care. I don't make any money if you upgrade. And then the module chains allow you to do some things and fix problems that you may or may not have. I mean, when I talk about my wife with the popcorn mouth, you don't have to tell her I said that. All right, in public, she'll come not be super thrilled that I told you guys that, but whatever. The issue is she normally doesn't have that issue, and she did on one book and a few chapters, and I was able to deal with it without going through and manually processing for an hour. So being able to deal with that, and then when it came up again, I already had the chain there, and it's just like I run it and I shut up, and I don't have to go back and whine to her, gosh, what are you doing? Just fix it. And you'll have that case where something comes up for you and you have the module chains and you can just fix things. The same with these other tools, where you know, you're not going to use this corrective EQ. You're not going to have this little buzzing thing that's going on in your audio all the time. This guy's done, I mean, I don't know how many, I couldn't tell you. I'd have to ask him, but we'll just say he's done a lot. I mean, you don't sit around and do these grunts and stuff. Ha. Yeah, I mean, you know, and you do all these things, and you just don't want to redo that kind of stuff. You imagine what that does to your throat. So to be able to have it fixed and to have a tool that can take out this, and it's not something he deals with normally, but I do have this guy here that sent me something with his clicks. He had some mouth clicks that we took out. He's got this killer booth, and yet, even with a killer booth, they put in a new air conditioner or something, that he had some noise that people hadn't noticed, and it's subtle, but when they amplified it to full production levels, then the noise in the background was just slightly too much. And we were able to take it out in a heartbeat with these tools. And it's not something he used to deal with, but he only deals with it certain times. And we checked his air conditioner, and we've checked his heating, and we've run it with both. And now we have something and a tool that he can batch process through and not worry about it. And it runs both with the air conditioner on, if it's not on, the tool doesn't bother it, so he can run it all the time with all his audio and be a happy camper. Okay, so there's all sorts of details here I missed. We kind of got off on talking about other things related to spectral repair and RX in general, and a couple tips and tricks there. And next week I'm going to do a full boot camp. Now it's paid, you got to pay for that. What I'm doing is condensing thousands of hours of my experience, and I'm going to do a couple right now scheduled being 2.5 to 3 hours. And I do these. I'm going to start doing these at least once a month, because I got people keep asking me, and I do private sessions on it. If someone wants it, I set it up just for your audio. But you can do a boot camp where it's a lot less, but it's not as individual. We have a group of people, and you have to sit through. We're going to correct a lot of audio and go into detail with all these different modules, so that you'll have the tools, you'll have the knowledge, and it'll work specifically on your audio, where it's an interactive session. That's totally different than me sitting here yapping at you, looking over here, trying to find questions and, give you good feedback on that. So I appreciate your time. I always appreciate your attention. You asked to let me know, is this sort of thing helpful for you? If it's not helpful for anybody, I can tell. I look at the numbers, and if after a few months nobody's shared it, nobody's passed it on to somebody else, then I can go, okay, well, that one was a total waste. They didn't like that at all. Because I can tell if someone likes it, then they pass it around to other people. They subscribe to the channel, they give it a thumbs up, and they tell me in different places, they go, oh, this was really good, this was really helpful, or it wasn't. And hey, my goal is to be helpful for people and to help as many people as I can for free. And then if people that need in-depth things and specific things, then of course, I do that kind of thing too. So I appreciate your time, your attention, and I'm going to go ahead and sign out here. I'm online. Find us in the Facebook group. Be sure you go join our Facebook group. I keep on telling people about that. But we have a great RX Facebook group. That's in the YouTube notes. If you don't have it, I'll try to get it. I'll be sure it's in the notes. But I do appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you on the wires in the future. I do these almost every week. Subscribe to the channel. You'll get more stuff. You have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.